All right, here are the basics of our IB scoring system, just for a quick overview. And then there will also be a second video that talks about how you are doing the final assessment and giving students their final scores. Just for context, though, we don't assign final scores until the end of a course. So for semester courses, that's in January. For year-long courses, that is in June. So there's plenty of time before we start looking at assigning final scores for students. This is the most important part. We have written, taught, and assessed curriculum, and you can see that the arrows go both ways. So it's a cycle. It's core understanding to be able to do the work of planning, teaching, and assessment, all informed by each other. So as we are assessing the curriculum, we're tweaking and rewriting. As we're teaching, we're constantly assessing, going back and changing what we might do in class the next day, creating a new formative, maybe creating a skill lesson that's going to help students keep moving forward. So in the MYP and with IB centered scoring as our grading methodology, we're constantly learning, tweaking, and moving forward. Very quickly, every subject area has 4 criterion. Those are the same for students in 6th through 10th grade in your MYP. So in our building this year, 7th, 8th, and 9th graders in the arts have the same 4 criterion: 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. Same is true in math, in language acquisition, in the sciences, etc. If you look at the overall pattern of these criteria, and the language courses are the exceptions to this. Language acquisition and Lang and Lit follow a little bit different pattern, but for the other 6 subject areas, criterion A is about grounding ourselves in the vocabulary and knowledge of that subject. Criterion B is going deeper. So developing, investigating, researching. So now we're digging in and using that knowledge to learn more. Criterion C is about producing something. So you're creating, presenting, writing, doing something, performing. Criterion D is looking back. Now we're reflecting, responding, evaluating, applying. So we're taking what we learned, we're doing something with it, and then we're reflecting on it. You should, for every course, have a scope and sequence, a course overview. If you are a new teacher and you have not seen your course overview where you can see at a snapshot what are the units we're working on this year and which criterion are we assessing in each unit, you can either talk to me, the IB coordinator, Angela Wilcox, or you can contact your collaborative teaching partner to find out more about kind of the scope and sequence, the big overview of the written curriculum. And then what we are using IB rubrics for what we're actually giving scores. So unlike old-fashioned letter grades with points and percents, unlike checklists or mastery lists where we just check things off or we're giving smiley or frowny faces, we are using the IB rubrics. And again, those should be linked. You have access to all of the rubrics for your subject area in the Google Drive folder. If you don't know where that is, again, you can reach out to me, your teaching partner, or like another co-teacher, and find out how do you find these rubrics. So what are the rubrics? They tell us both what we want students to know and what we want them to do. And then we give them feedback on how well they know and can do it. So we can literally just circle things on the rubric to give students feedback about their level of growth and their level of understanding. Rubrics have numbers, but they are not points. They are scores. So points accumulate, they add up, and then we divide them by the number of the assignments and come up with an overall percent. Scores communicate. So points accumulate, scores communicate. It's simply a description of what you already know and can do at this point. And then from that, you can set goals to continue to improve. So, how can a rubric guide your unit planning and your day to day lesson planning? If you look at the objectives at the top of the rubric, you will see for example, in language and literature, we have four aims or outcomes at the top of the rubric that we want students be able to do competently by the end of the course. So the rubric tells students, parents, and teachers, here's what I'm going to be assessing. This can help students focus their work on the skills and knowledge they're going to be assessed on. No more shooting in the dark, like I need to study for 12 hours because I don't know what's going to be on the test. Students know exactly how they're going to be assessed. They've practiced it and they've gotten practice feedback before they get to the summative. And then how do we know how well a student has performed? Each level on the rubric describes a step along the journey of learning. Rubrics are intentionally starting with the beginner band, that 1-2 band. It describes what, in affirmative language, what you can know and can do so far. So it might be minimal, it might be limited, it might be rigid, it might have a number of mistakes, but this is where you start as a learner and then you grow over the course of the year up to those higher bands of the rubrics. So we can see that over time, a student can grow. Rubrics can at first glance feel overwhelming and very wordy. So make sure you're looking at the words that are in bold on your rubric. Those are going to show you the growth pathway for your students. And you can teach them to look for those words in the rubric as well. They're going to be different for different subject areas. So sometimes they're quantitative, how much of the skill is a student showing? And sometimes those bolded words are command terms that say things like describe, list, outline, evaluate, that are at increasingly complex levels of thinking. But you will, no matter whether they're quantitative words or qualitative descriptors, you're going to see growth from that 1-2 band up to the 7-8 band. So when should students see rubric or strands of a rubric? So, of course, as they're preparing for their final summative assessment, but they should also see shorter rubrics along the road as they practice and they get formative feedback on those rubric strands. So, with the next examples, be a transfer thinker. What do you see that won't work for you all the time? Maybe not at all, but I want you to think about how you could transfer this example to a similar assessment task in your own instruction. So this is from an 8th grade design class. They took one strand of the rubric and they turned it into a handout. They said, this is a pre-write handout. Here's the strand. You need to construct a logical plan which outlines the efficient use of time and resources. Then they turned those into inquiry questions. What are the steps? What resources? How long will each step take? They can then give students feedback on this one single strand of the criterion C outcome based on how well they answer these questions. Here's another one from an English class. Again, they have a single strand, strand 4, and again, this is a formative assessment. So they're doing on the back of the sheet, here are the steps. They're doing some work with analyzing a character, and then they've got the rubric right here at the bottom for this one strand of criterion A, which is the analyzing criterion. And then you can see how that formative would lead into a summative where they're using that analysis skill, but they're also using 2 other skills. They're justifying opinions and ideas, and they're looking for similarities and differences between characters. So they've practiced each one of those strands as separate formatives, and then for the summative, it's all coming together. This is important. These are the holistic general grade descriptors. We can get you a poster for your classroom if it would be helpful to have this listed. What I love about these general grade descriptors is they describe overall what a student at each level, 1 through that 7-8 band, knows and can do as a student, not on a specific task, but in general. So you can see that by the level 3 work, they're producing acceptable quality work with basic understanding. By 4, that higher band of the 3-4 rubric, they're doing good quality work, most concepts and contexts, few misunderstandings. So if, as you are scoring a student's work, you're like, I'm pretty sure they're in the 3-4 band, but I don't know if they're a 3 or a 4, I always come back to these general grade descriptors, and it helps me decide if they're at the lower or the higher end of that band. You can also see that why that 7-8 band, like that's not our expectation that every kid is getting a 7 and 8 on every assignment. High quality, frequently innovative, comprehensive, nuanced, consistent, sophisticated transfer. They're If they're doing work at the 7 band at the very beginning of the year, that means that we need to keep upping the challenge for them, because if they're already able to communicate in sophisticated and nuanced ways about what you're teaching in September, then we need to push them higher and give them more complex work to play with, because a 7 early, like this early in the year, would be give us an indication that the work is not going to be challenging enough for them over the course of the year. Then we have our approaches to learning skills, where these scores are reported out as a 2-letter code. And I think actually we've moved to DM as in Mary for the lowest level. So, but there is an example rubric for collaboration. Every grade level has one approaches to learning skill that they report out on formally through Infinite Campus. 7th grade, that is organization. 8th grade, it is self-management, their affective skills, so managing themselves, managing their emotions. And grade 9, it is reflective skills. And so we've got rubrics already built for many of these approaches to learning skills, and we can build other ones if you need them. You can also create rubrics for skills that are not your specific grade level one, and I can work with you to show you how to report those out in Infinite Campus. And you can see again, minimally, uh, sometimes consistently, and then leadership level. So does not meet, partially meets expectations, exceed expectations. And there is no minimum number of times you need to score these ATL skills in your classroom. We're still just making our way with learning what works, what helps kids, what helps teachers. If you need more skills in your classroom because you want to do, for example, um, vocabulary work, or verb charts, or making sure that kids are coming with all of their materials and a charged iPad every day, or things like that, we can create some daily ATL feedback forms that make it super easy for you to give kids that feedback on a day-to-day basis. Again, that's not part of our academic learning score, but our ATL scores can also be reported out, and you can use those as a tool to help students learn and practice the skills they need to be successful in class. All right, really quickly, you are entering both formative and summative scores in Infinite Campus. They are not weighted because we're not working on a percent-based gradebook. So it's not 20, 80, or any of those other formulations we used to use in a percent-based gradebook. But all of those points are data points that help us support our final overall score. So formative and summative both matter. We'll primarily look at summative, the pattern in the summative scores, but we will use our formative scores as additional feedback for coming up with that final score. So those get reported out in Infinite Campus. And then we're working continually to educate students and staff. And yes, if you are a ninth grade teacher, those scores also go into Infinite Campus as IB scores. Should they need a grade point average at any point as they are in or leaving high school, there is a formula for generating an a GPA that is the closest approximation we can get um, for those purposes. All right. So that's IB Grading 101. If you want me to come join you on a prep period, if you have questions before or after school, just come find me. I'm happy to answer any specifics. Thanks for playing along.